it doesn't feel like a partisan point to say that the UK economy and UK households have really struggled. And ultimately, the question that we're going to try and answer in this video is if there's a clear path forward for the economy, or have the Conservatives ruined the economy forever? Now, there's all kinds of analysis like this floating around by paid-for pundits and people who've had their brains pickled by Brexit. And our analysis ultimately is going to be better for three main reasons. The first is going to be we're looking over a slightly longer time period. The second reason is we're going to be looking at comparable countries to get a better idea about if there are global influences. And the third thing is, most importantly, we're going to be looking at multiple variables in order to build a more comprehensive picture. So the first is government debt. Now, I've come out of the gate swinging on this one, and that's for a couple of key reasons. The first is that after we had the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, this then became the line in the sand. This then became the fulcrum with which to apply leverage as to why we had to go through austerity. The government's outgoings were too great, and so therefore we needed to cut back on spending. Now, this has all sorts of ideological implications. This has all sorts of economic misguidedness, but we'll save that for another day. And so what you can really see here is that although debt has indeed increased under the Labour government as they had to rescue banks and so on, the truth of the matter is that government debt has continued to increase under the Conservative government, and that's for a couple of key reasons. The first is that although they have sought to cut spending, the problem with cutting that spending is that it's meant that ultimately the economy has grown more slowly. And one of the things that we look at, as we have done in this graph, is the debt to GDP ratio. This is the amount of money that the government owes to external investors when compared to the size of the economy, the amount of stuff it produces in a year. And the IFS have this interesting concept here where they measure the percentage of income that goes towards interest repayments and the growth rate of the economy. Having a high debt to GDP ratio, but you have a fast growing economy, is less problematic. The problem invariably is that we are a highly indebted country with very, very slow growth. We should also point out that with interest rates skyrocketing, there is a secondary layer, which unfortunately is going to make this much, much more painful. And that's, if you look at this graph here, you can see the amount that the government has to spend on debt repayments. These have absolutely skyrocketed. And this is all money that has to be financed. So whilst the country is indebted, that debt is also getting more expensive to service. So this is really one of the core principles, one of the fundamental challenges that the economy is going to face going forward. Economic growth. Now, as we kind of have alluded to already, the UK economy has grown really slowly since the financial crisis. The National Institute for Economic and Social Research found that the growth rate from the interwar period up to about the 1970s was about 3.2%. From 1973 to the 2008 financial crisis, it was about 2.3%, but since the financial crisis, it's been 1.2%. And so what you can really see here is the divergence between the trend growth rate and the actual growth rate that we've achieved. But whilst it is fair to say that the financial crisis was a global event, I think it is also fair to say that the UK has fared particularly poorly. If we look at this diagram here, this is an international comparison comparing the UK to other G7 economies. And so what you can also see here is the impact of 2016 onwards, and obviously the B word will come up and we'll discuss that a bit later. Investment. Now, frustratingly, the UK has never scored particularly high marks when it comes to investment. You can see on this diagram here that historically we've been well below the G7 average and even towards the bottom of the tables, and that's got historical hangovers. But the truth is that since the financial crisis, investment has completely flatlined. I mean, it's gone virtually nowhere, and this trend gets unfortunately even worse after the 2016 referendum, where growth has started to, by some measures, decline, but for the most part has again just completely flatlined. Now, this is problematic for a couple of reasons. Investment is one of the key drivers of economic growth. So if you're a country like ours, as we've mentioned, that is both highly indebted and has been growing very slowly, part of that is driven by a complete lack of investment. And the IPPR think tank estimates that the UK has underinvested by about £500 billion. Like, these are some big fucking numbers that we're throwing around right now. But the truth is, I think that really illustrates the scale of the challenge which is ultimately going to be faced for the incoming Labour government. And again, when we make comparisons internationally, you can see here, again, the UK is in black, that the UK has just really, really struggled in this area. Now, one of the things that we like to talk about a lot on this channel when we're discussing economics is ultimately that so many economic variables are intertwined with one another. And so this, frankly, piss-poor performance when it comes to investment has led to a piss-poor performance on the productivity side. Now, productivity is, we have not done well so far on the previous three, but this is one where the UK really has a dismal record. You can see here again, we show in the kind of pinkish coloured line the trend productivity and the actual productivity, and what you really see from 2007 is just gone completely nowhere. Now you might be asking, why is productivity important? And the short answer is ultimately is that there's this quote from a Nobel Prize winning economist, Paul Krugman, says that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run it pretty much is everything. And that's really it. If every other economic variable remains absolutely the same, but your population are able to just produce a little bit more every single year, then they're going to be more productive, and therefore the economy is going to continue to grow. And there was this study here by the London School of Economics that found that this poor productivity performance is the leading factor when it comes to Britain's virtually complete economic malaise for the last 15 years. Wage growth. Now, you can start to see the trend developing here. We went from investment to productivity, now productivity to wage growth. Now, historically, as you can see here, wage growth and productivity growth virtually moved in lockstep with one another. If a person is more productive, they are able to produce more with a given set of inputs, then that means that they don't need to work any longer in order to produce more or the same output. And so this very tight relationship that you see benefits both the employer and the employee. And what you can see here is, again, one of the important things that we're talking about is trends. What you can see here in the dashed line is the trend increase in real wages. Between 1970 and 2007, real wages increased by around 33% per decade. But in the 2010s, this fell to below zero. And so real wages have just gone absolutely nowhere. The Resolution Foundation did this study, and they found that wage growth in the UK has not been this poor since the Napoleonic War. That is just insane. And this 15 years of lost wage growth, the same study from the Resolution Foundation said that had the trend growth rate continued, that the average worker would be £10,700 per year better off. And that's what makes this also frustrating. Housing costs. Speak to anyone and they will tell you that housing is incredibly unaffordable in their part of the country. You can see on this graph here how housing used to move in reasonable lockstep with wages, as we see in this diagram. This increase in housing costs means that people just don't have the money to be able to go out and spend on other things. The other frustrating thing is that there are kind of real world economic implications here. You start to get skill mismatches. People who might be able to earn more and be more productive in a particular area, but if they can't afford to live there, they can only afford to live somewhere else where they can't make as much money. That's a problem. You've got a skill shortage and a skill mismatch. And this also leads to real labour immobility. And the last one, the best till last, Brexit. Okay, let's just rip the plaster off with this one and get into it. If you look at this graph here, we can see that trade volumes after the UK has left the EU have dropped by around 15%. Now, before everyone starts squawking and has had their brains pickled by Brexit, this is true. There's plenty of other evidence. You can look at this paper, which basically identifies that increased red tape costs are being passed on to consumers. This is an inflationary pressure. This was a piece from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which basically found that the economic damage done to Brexit is going to cost the UK economy about 4%. Again, leaving the EU has basically meant that we've had plenty of labour shortages. There's been a decline in foreign direct investment. A piece from the UN found that foreign direct investment into the UK had declined by about 19%, and they attributed this largely to Brexit uncertainties. We've got the depreciation of the sterling. After the referendum, the sterling absolutely cratered and has yet to recover. This weakness in the sterling basically means that imported goods will become disproportionately more expensive, which again adds to inflationary pressures. What do I think in conclusion? It can be very easy for all the doom and gloom to seep through into your brain. So, did the Tories ruin the economy forever? The short answer is kind of. And I appreciate that it's maybe not the definitive answer you were looking for. I think the problem invariably is that the UK economy is not just got its shoelaces tied, its hands bound, and is going to be in an episode of Dexter or something. The problem that we invariably find is that the UK economy is weak in so many areas that if we had some breakout variables that we could point to, we could say, aha, the economy is not doing very well, but real wages are on the increase, then you could use that as a shoot and you could really leverage that to try and improve the economy in other areas. And so that's invariably the problem, is that there's so much weakness in so many parts of the economy that just the concerted effort necessary to get the economy going again is enormous. So am I saying the economy is in tip-top shape? Hell no. Am I giving the economy a clean bill of health? Absolutely not. As I say, it's going to take a Herculean, a gargantuan effort to get the economy moving again and to improve the economic conditions that we all find ourselves in. But I think it can be done. You start to see how all these variables are really interlocked and how they can feed on one another. Now, that's if you've got an economy that's moving in the right direction, that really works to your benefit because you have this multiplier effect. But it also means that when the economy starts to slow down, you can end up in these downward spirals. Now, the question on everyone's mind is, can Labour do it? Well, the short answer is, make sure you watch this video just here where we're going to be going into that very question. Do Labour's plans so far have what it takes in order to get the economy moving again? Thanks very much for watching. If you've liked this video, please subscribe.